I hate anime. Or at least that's what I'd say for the better half of my life. Obviously that's not entirely true now since I'm making this video. I used to be into anime when I first discovered it, but then quickly started hating it, because more often than not it would be really tacky and full of predictable and annoying cliches. You know, stuff like a cast of kids or teenagers being way more powerful and smart than adults. There always having to be some small, usually animal comic relief companion, shit ton of fanservice and over-sexualization you wouldn't see in other mediums, over-explaining every combat move instead of trusting the viewer's intelligence, etc, etc. But due to some really unusual circumstances, I gave anime another chance, and after discovering several outliers that I really loved, I was left wanting more and kept digging deeper. And the more I'd watch, the less good stuff there would be left. So at this point, it's at least a cozy activity if nothing else. Sometimes I just don't have the energy to play video games anymore, and those cliffhangers every 20 minutes can get quite addicting. It's a bit of a guilty pleasure to me now. At this point I just crossed a total of 100 animes watched. While looking for recommendations, I signed up to myanimelist.com to be able to track the stuff I've watched and still plan to watch, and noticed that it also has a global anime ranking board, so I thought, what the heck, might as well contribute with my own ratings, especially if numerical ratings help me get more recommendations based on what I liked. And now it dawned on me, since I have all these scores, I might as well make a video out of it. It's going to be a bit of an experiment, since I usually focus on video games in a different video format, but these days I have a little spare time for this channel, and this sort of video seemed easy to make, so why not? Maybe you'll end up discovering something worth watching. All that being said, I despise giving anything numerical scores, as any review I can make is going to be subjective based on my personal tastes. I won't be surprised at all if you disagree with some of my takes. The scores are in numerical system from 1 to 10. And please, I want you to know that I consider 5 to be the complete average, not 7 or something like in school grading systems. So based on that, my rating overall could seem a little low. And since I don't have a better ordering system, I'm going to go down the list alphabetically. And my anime list counts different seasons as different entries to the list, so I'll be doing the same. All clear? Then let's get started. Akira. The first anime on the list, and my opinion might already be controversial. It seems like just about everyone online praises Akira as a masterpiece. I assume it needs no introduction because of that. I, however, didn't find it all that mind-blowing. It was decent though. 7 out of 10. Arakawa Under the Bridge. This one is pretty different to what I usually watch, but I loved it. It's a gag comedy focused on a romance between a completely business-minded young man and a homeless girl who believes she's an alien. The whole cast is full of crazy yet endearing characters, and every episode feels like a silly Yakuza sub-story. I absolutely loved the female lead, as she reminds me of someone very precious to me. It's a bit of a shame that the anime is not a complete adaptation of the manga, but it's a faithful one. I wish it focused on the main plot and romance a bit more though, so I give the first season 7++ out of 10, and the second season an 8 out of 10, just for the absolute banger of an outro song. Baccano. This one seemed like an anime I'd like. A historical setting, an eclectic cast of weirdos, batshit crazy action, but it felt like it was a bit too random in the end and the main plot felt lacking. 6 out of 10. Bakemonogatari. I tried this one because it was from the same creators as Arakawa Under the Bridge, and it seemed like the more popular show with more sequels, but I was left a bit disappointed and didn't continue past the first season. It's a story about a high schooler who would keep encountering supernatural beings, exorcising them, and meeting romantic interests while doing so. Fairly generic premise, honestly. I feel like it might have had many Japanese wordplays that just don't translate very well. At least it had a neat art direction. 5 out of 10. Beastars. I didn't really expect it, but I loved Beastars right from the awesome stop motion intro. Beastars takes place in a world of anthropomorphic animals, or furries as some might call them, and while it's civilized and mostly peaceful, there's constant tension between herbivores and carnivores. The main plot is about an unlikely romance between a wolf and a bunny, a murder mystery, and societal issues. This show is great in all regards in my opinion. First 2 seasons get a 9 out of 10 from me, and at the time I'm writing this, the second half of the third season isn't out yet. But I felt like the first half dipped a bit in the storytelling department, and I can only give it a 7 out of 10. Beck, Mongolian Chop Squad. Beck is a story about a rock band. Not the real world Beck though. It has a lot of cool stuff, good music, likable characters, romance, tension. It would keep inspiring me to practice bass myself. The only thing holding it back for me was the fact that the main cast are teenagers and school kids. It felt like they were too young to be doing the things they were doing to be believable. I guess the awkward first love plot wouldn't work well otherwise though. Oh well, 8 out of 10. Bocce the Rock. Another anime about a rock band, but this one is a lot lighter one, with less substance. It's about a girl on the spectrum who has terrible social anxiety, but is a phenomenal guitarist. It's pretty entertaining to watch, but nothing major in my opinion. I have no clue how it's in my anime list global top 50. 7 out of 10. Bungo Stray Dogs. A series about an organization of weirdos with supernatural powers who take on unusual cases that regular police cannot handle. I honestly expected more from this show, but it turned out to be pretty formulaic stuff in my opinion. I didn't even bother continuing after several episodes because it just failed to hook me in. I don't typically rate animes I haven't finished, but I mark this one as 5 out of 10 since it felt very average to me. Chainsaw Man. This one's cool. Great art, great music, fun action, wacky plot, good character dynamics, and so on. It does have some of those anime cliches though, like the main cast being teens, everyone wearing formal suits and so on. I guess I might also have a bit of a grudge against it for overshadowing Dorohedoro, which was from the same studio, but in my opinion a lot more inventive. Chainsaw Man's still cool though and definitely worth a watch. 8 out of 10. Dan the Dan. I didn't expect much from it, but it pleasantly surprised me. It's about a couple of high schoolers starting to fall in love, while also encountering various weird ghosts and aliens. It's a bit like Mob Psycho combined with FLCL's crazy action. It's not the deepest thing ever though. 8 out of 10. Dead Mount Death Play. This one's a reverse isekai. A powerful fantasy sorcerer gets transported to modern day Japan. Wackiness ensues. It wasn't bad, but it failed to really capture me. I didn't find the cast too interesting, and the second season kept introducing more and more people I just couldn't care about. 6 out of 10, and 5 out of 10 for season 2. Decadence. A story about people living in a walking city, roaming a wasteland, trying to survive attacks of fantastical monsters. That's about all I can say without spoilers. This show pleasantly surprised me, and it was a very comfy adventure story to watch. But I didn't vibe entirely with some of the artistic choices. 7 plus out of 10. Delicious in Dungeon. This one's amazing. One of my favorites lately. It really showcases the wizardry game series influence in Japan, with the show having similar fantasy races and a plot about delving ever deeper into a dungeon. The show starts as a silly episodic adventure, but gradually gets more and more serious. Very entertaining, great characters. The only thing keeping the first season from being a 10 out of 10 is the slower first half, because I could see people writing it off as something of lower substance before getting to the actual meat. Maybe the next season, when it comes out. 9 plus out of 10. Dorohedoro. Dorohedoro, my beloved. I had already dedicated an entire video to it, and I'm so glad it's actually getting a second season this year, because I really had my doubts. It's just that its whole aesthetic and vibe is 100% me. The title roughly translates to modern sludge, and it's quite fitting. It's set in a nasty, industrial-looking world, but one that's also full of bloodthirsty mages that power their spells by the will of Satan. And the best part is that it has a very well-rounded cast of characters. The story follows multiple opposing factions, but all of them are very likable, yet very morally grey. And it's nearly impossible to choose who to root for, because everyone's cool and has justifiable motivations. It has interesting mysteries, plenty of comedy, cool action, and a stunning art style. 10 out of 10 from me, without a doubt. Dororo. Very similar sounding title from the previous one. It's a story set in feudal Japan about a cursed boy who lives with a prosthetic body without any human senses and has to defeat demons to regain his real body. The beginning set a really heavy tone, but it didn't stay as heavy throughout. At parts, the show also got a bit repetitive. Still, a pretty cool story with interesting dilemmas about what makes a human a human. 7 out of 10. Dragon Ball. Dragon Ball needs no introduction. Dragon Ball Z was always the super popular thing here in Lithuania, but I was always more partial to the original series because of the more unique world building. That being said, I'm not a big fan myself. I honestly tried giving it a chance, and it did have neat moments, but it also had plenty of things that didn't sit right with me, especially the pedo undertones, like Master Roshi, who's straight up a pedo pervert, being portrayed as a completely good character. 5 out of 10. Durarara. This is another one from the makers of Baccano, following a similar formula of a wacky cast doing weird things, but this time in modern day Japan and a mostly younger cast. I found the characters more likable this time, and the plot was a lot more concrete, which made the series overall more enjoyable. 8 minus out of 10. Ergo Proxy. This is pretty much Evanescence the anime. Jokes aside, it's a pretty cool, somewhat philosophical sci-fi story. It's been quite a while since I watched this one, so my memory is hazy, but I mostly liked it. 8 out of 10. FLCL, or Fooly Cooly, is a wild ride. It's one of the weirder and more eclectic animes around, really short too. It had insane animation and a great punk soundtrack. The whole anime was a bit like a music video. I can't really tell what was going on in it, it's wacky to the maximum. Cool for the punk vibes, but the storytelling is very loose. 7 out of 10. Frieren, Beyond Journey's End. Frieren follows the story of a nearly immortal elf whose grand adventure is already over and her party already very old or dead from old age. It's a nice story about the value of relationships and the smaller joys in life, but at the same time I found it to be a pretty generic, if competent, fantasy show. I simply cannot comprehend how it took the number 1 spot on my anime list's global ranking. I mean, it's a good show, but nowhere that good in my opinion. 7 out of 10. Gangsta. Like the title suggests, this show is about the criminal underground. It's edgy, violent, over the top, pretty sexualized, basically ticks all the boxes. Can't say it left a very strong impression on me. It's also forsaken to never be finished. 6 out of 10. Ghost in the Shell. Sci-fi, militaristic, law enforcement cyborgs and conspiracy theories. I might be cursed to hell and back for this, because I know there are people who swear by this, but I didn't find Ghost in the Shell that impressive. At least in comparison to how much I see it being praised. The issue is that it simply is not my taste. With few exceptions, I'm generally neither a fan of sci-fi nor militaristic stuff. So the 1995 film and both standalone complex series seasons unanimously get a 7 out of 10 from me. Ghost Stories. Ghost Stories would be a pretty bad show, but I'm rating the English dub here, and it's a completely different phenomenon from the original Japanese version. It's a typical series of school kids encountering and exorcising ghosts, but it did so bad that the translation team got complete freedom to do whatever they want to sell the show, and what they did is probably the least accurate, the dumbest, and the most offensive dub in anime history. Pretty much remaking the plot and the characters into something completely new, and honestly, it's hilarious. I'm very glad such a peculiar thing exists. 8 out of 10. Goblin Slayer. Goblin Slayer takes place in a fairly typical high fantasy setting, but attempts to subvert expectations by making it brutal and uncompromising. The main premise is that goblins are usually considered very weak monsters in RPGs, but they're actually very dangerous to unsuspecting newbie adventurers as well as common folk. The idea is cool, but I feel like the series hurts itself by still being a very tropey anime with all your over-sexualized characters, very generic setting, and not the strongest of stories. The first season was intriguing enough, it gets a 6 out of 10 from me. The second season, however, felt like it lost even the small bit of the unique identity it had, and turned from a fucked up dude genociding goblins, who are a bigger threat than they seem, to a typical RPG style party just going on typical adventures. 4 out of 10, and I'm no longer willing to continue watching the series if it continues. It feels like it tried to mimic the darkness of Berserk, but without the actual substance. Golden Kamui. This series was a pleasant discovery for me. It takes place in an actual historical setting of the Russo-Japanese War in the early 1900s. It follows the story of a soldier nicknamed Sugimoto the Immortal, who discovers that there is a grand treasure collected from local tribesfolk, and the clues to find it are pieces of map tattooed on criminal skins. Various people want the treasure, so a wild race begins. The series is absolutely ridiculous in the best way possible, but never in a way that makes it unimmersive. It's a very entertaining and original comical adventure. It's been a while and my memories are hazy about the high and low points of the series, so I'm giving all 4 seasons that are out at the time 9 out of 10. Heavenly Delusion. Another great discovery. My expectations were low, especially since the key art looks sort of generic and unimpressive, but the series is actually quite right. It follows a story of 2 teenagers roaming post-apocalyptic Japan that is ravaged by near-invincible monsters, often titled man-eaters. The story and mysteries in it are very intriguing, the character chemistry is great, and I love that the series respects viewers' intelligence by letting them piece some things together from provided clues, instead of stating them very obviously like many animes do. The only caveat that irked me quite a bit is some events in the last episodes of the season, which I don't want to spoil, but it just feels like serious trauma was shrugged away way too easily. Anyway, I'm eagerly awaiting a sequel. 9 out of 10. Hellsing Ultimate. Hellsing seems to have a near legendary status among the more mature ranking animes, so I was hoping to like it, but I just didn't. I'm sorry. I know there are people who swear by this stuff, but it was simply not my taste. Hellsing is about an agency that hunts vampires, but then the Vatican and the Nazis get involved. It had a cool presentation, but it was too much of a desensitized power fantasy to me. It didn't have much character development going on, it was just a badass fight scene after a badass fight scene. My favorite part of the anime unusually ended up being the 2 more comic relief characters, because at least they brought some emotion into the series, one of them being Schrodinger's Catboy, and the other the newbie female vampire/vampire huntress, who was the only one who had at least some character development. 6 out of 10. Higurashi, When They Cry. I have real mixed feelings about this one. At its worst, it's a generic slice of life anime. At its best, it's a dark mystery thriller. It follows the life of some children living in a small and fairly isolated village in the 80s. And for the most part, it follows regular, comfy children's shenanigans, until things get a little crazy. I'm already not a fan of child casts or cutesy art styles, but the main offender with this series was the pacing. Often it would take very long for anything significant to happen, and too often it would be going over the same slice of life things instead of addressing the main mystery. The seasons are just titled weird words instead of numbers, so I get confused which one's which, but I'll try to get them chronologically. Season 1, 6 out of 10. It just takes way too long to address the main mystery. Kai, or Season 2, 7 out of 10. This is the series at its peak, in my opinion, with the main plot pacing up. Kira, 7 out of 10. A lot shorter and more condensed series, which works in its favor. Outbreak, 6 out of 10. This one just feels like it makes less sense and has more loose ends. Go. 5 out of 10. I was mad at this one. It's a remake made nearly 10 years later, but it isn't a remake but an actual sequel. The art is worse, but what's even worse is that 80% of it is the same as the first season with very minor differences, which just gives new viewers a worse experience and really disrespects returning viewers' time. Sotsu. 6 out of 10. This continues the remake slash sequel, but at least most of the repetition is done at this point. Initial D. How could I have not watched something called Initial D when I used to go by Dom the Big D? I couldn't care less about cars or racing, but I found the series to be quite comfy to watch. It would have quite a few anime cliches, like a high schooler cast, an unbeatable protagonist, a beach episode, and so on. But at least it's competent on what it's doing. Again, my memory is crap and I don't recall the highs and lows of the series, so I give all 4 seasons slash stages I watched a 7 out of 10. Interspecies reviewers. I thought that porn and comedy can be a pretty fun mix sometimes. Not in this case though. Interspecies Reviewers is a series about a couple of dudes in a fantasy setting having sex with various species and rating their experiences. I kinda like the premise, but I didn't like the execution whatsoever. 4 out of 10. Iria. Zerum the Animation. This is a short sci-fi adventure about a bounty hunter going against a biological weapon in the shape of a nearly invincible living being. I started out with Zerum live-action films, loved those, and decided to give the anime a try. I really like the universe, but I think I prefer the handcrafted charm of the live-action adaptations, as in the anime medium, Zerum felt less impressive. It's still enjoyable though. 7 out of 10. JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. Oh boy, how can we go without the essentials? I went in knowing nothing except that there are tons of memes about this anime, but I was still surprised that the first part was about vampires in ye olde England, and the second part that takes place during World War II era is one of my favorites. It was a bit weird how the season of anime adapted 2 parts in one go, which are nearly completely separate stories, but that resulted in pretty quick pacing, which I liked. 8 out of 10. JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Stardust Crusaders. Now I might be controversial here again, since part 3 seems to be the most popular one and Jotaro the most iconic of JoJo's, but I thought he was just an asshole and I wasn't a fan of the different format from the previous parts. It had good pacing and inventive fights, but Stardust Crusaders opted out for a more episodic Enemy of the Week format, which I find really uninteresting, as I only really care about the main plot. And it also switched from more martial arts focused fights to pretty much glorified Pokemon battles. At first I really disliked the introduction of stands, and they were the least interesting in this part. They did get pretty inventive in the later parts at least. Watching just several of the very first and the very last episodes feels enough to understand the whole story of this part without losing all that much. Both parts of Stardust Crusaders get a 5 out of 10 for turning into a lot more typical anime. JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Diamond is Unbreakable. Possibly the most stylized of the JoJo's, but it switched the format up again, and instead of some grand adventure, had just weird things happen in a single town. There were things to like, but at the same time I felt like there were bits that felt like filler and were not related to the main plot. This is the one part I wouldn't mind rewatching though, because I might appreciate it more now after overall getting deeper into the whole series. 6 out of 10. JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Golden Wind. This was the first JoJo part I was watching as it was coming out, and it so happened to be one of my favorite ones. This time it's about Italian mafia dudes, and the strongest part of it for me was that it focused on the whole group of characters, giving each of them time to shine, while the JoJo himself would almost fall to the sidelines at times. This series, and this part in particular, also makes me hate the copyright law even more, because this could be such a cool rock opera if it could use all the music it references. I mean, there's Black Sabbath, Metallica, and King Crimson to name a few. All that cool music would really elevate the anime to another level. Anyway, this part good. 8 out of 10. JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, Stone Ocean. I have a soft spot for prison settings for some reason. We got a mostly female cast this time, and some of the weirder moments in the series. In a good way though. All 3 seasons of Stone Ocean get a 7 out of 10 from me. Kaiji Ultimate Survivor and Kaiji Against All Rules. Kaiji is a pretty unique anime in which the main character has to literally gamble for his life. He would get into these dire situations where he would have to participate in various games in which he would either win a shit ton of cash or lose his life. It sports a pretty unique art style too. Couldn't say it's the best thing I've seen, but it's definitely inventive and entertaining. 8 out of 10 for both seasons. Konosuba, God's Blessing on This Wonderful World. I basically tried watching this just because I would see a lot of it online, especially it being praised as a great comedy series. Instead, I found a pretty typical fantasy isekai series where a loser protagonist forms a harem except with a comedy focus. It has its entertainment value, but I can't say it's all that great. 7 out of 10 for the first season, 6 out of 10 for the second season, 5 out of 10 for the third season. I just feel like the jokes get a bit old as it goes, and the story isn't good enough to outweigh all the generic nonsense. Last Exile. This one is set in a fictional world that's being destabilized by wars and ecological disasters. The main focus of the series are the airships that are used for battles, and which the 2 teenager protagonists learn to pilot while getting involved in the conflict. It's a fairly simple series, but well executed to the point of just being a pretty good and enjoyable adventure story. 8 out of 10. Love, Chunibyo, and Other Delusions. Lately, I've been quite a sucker for romance series, and this is one of those. It follows the story of a boy who used to be a giant nerd and wants to be a bit cooler and more social in this new high school, but ends up befriending a bunch of girls who are very much on the spectrum and falling in love with the girl who pretty much lives entirely within her own delusions about being a fantasy character. It's a very anime. Bunch of tacky jokes, little character development in favor of sequels, the dreaded high schools, but somehow I just found this show comfy to watch. The first season gets a 6 out of 10 purely on the merit of trying to tackle a deeper and more sensitive subject towards the end. The first season's bonus episode, Sparkling Slapstick Novel, gets a 5 out of 10, completely average stuff. So does the second season, Heartthrob. It's simply more of the same, but this time without any deeper topics. Its special episode, Heartthrob, The Rika Wars, gets a 5 out of 10 too. And then there's the Take On Me film, which at least attempted to resolve some things, but could have been a lot better if it dared to dig deeper and give the characters more development. 6 out of 10. Made in Abyss. This is a story about a couple of orphans delving into a mysterious and incredibly dangerous abyss in the center of their home island. The show put me off from watching it because of its cutesy art style at first, which I'm still not really a fan of, but I kept hearing how messed up and dark it actually is, so I caved in, gave it a shot, and was surprised by how interesting it is. It has an interesting premise and plot, a soundtrack that actually gets stuck in my head, and it does have some pretty dark and messed up moments. It just seems like its cute, silly adventure half and its dark, shock value content are a bit at odds with each other. The first season gets an 8 out of 10, Dawn of the Deep Soul gets a 7 out of 10. It was a bit less surprising at this point, and I wish it had a bit more satisfying conclusion. I'm currently still watching the second series, The Golden City of the Scorching Sun, so no rating for it just yet. Mob Psycho 100. Yet another anime about a schoolboy tackling ghosts. At least it was well executed and had some fun characters. Somehow I have barely any memory of what even happened in that show though. 7 out of 10 for all 3 seasons. Mononoke. This is basically The Witcher, but in feudal Japan and myths tied to it. A mysterious man goes around and purges evil spirits. The best part of the series? is probably its incredible art direction. It's unlike anything else, and it's very beautiful to look at. 8 out of 10. Monster. An elite brain surgeon gets accused of crimes committed by one of his former patients, who ended up being a criminal mastermind. So he sets out to prove his innocence and stop the criminal, all while his devotion to saving people no matter the cost is shaken. This is a very strong, serious story, and it did have the potential to be a masterpiece, but in my opinion, it could have had a slightly better pacing and the main protagonist was a bit too predictably good two shoes. 8 plus out of 10. Monster Musume. Everyday life with monster girls. Yeah. This one is straight up a guilty pleasure. It's just one step shy of being a straight up hentai. I just got curious to watch it because I remember seeing a bunch of clips of it on Pornhub back when it first came out. It's really fucking stupid, but it's still a fairly entertaining horny comedy slice of life series. 6 out of 10. Naruto. Yep. Some people might hate me for disliking Dragon Ball yet praising Naruto, but I really enjoy the series. It was one of the first animes I've ever seen, and I thought it was really cool when I first randomly caught it on Jetix. I had never seen an animated show actually being bloody up to that point and having cool rock music. The show is not without its flaws, far from it, but I can't deny that I'm also biased because of nostalgia. All this silly stuff in Naruto aside, I'd really say it has a very cool atmosphere with all the desaturated colors and the amazing soundtrack. The early episodes with the Zabuza arc felt the best in the whole series to me, because they actually felt dark and tense. 8 out of 10. Naruto Shippuden. I say this is pretty much the staple of action-adventure anime. It still has the same good and bad qualities from the original show. The story gets a bit more grand as the characters are older, but the show is plagued by filler episodes even worse than before, especially the war arc. At least there's now a fan-made edit of the entire series that removes all the fillers and the galore of flashbacks, which would even recall things that happened in the same episode. I actually was considering making a video about Naruto at some point and what it could have done to be better, but then I thought there are entire channels that focus entirely on anime and are a lot more passionate about it than me. Also, so many dumb things could have been avoided if Sasuke and Naruto would just admit they're hardcore gay for each other. Screw that Sakura love triangle, it's all between those two. Anyway, lots and lots of flaws. What would be ninjas turn into pretty much sorcerers, but there's a lot to love. 8 out of 10. Noragami and Noragami Aragoto. These are 2 seasons of a series about a god with no followers living in modern-day Japan, and a girl who becomes able to see him due to a near-death experience. It's a fairly enjoyable and competent little story with pretty likable characters, but it's a fairly typical anime. Nothing groundbreaking. 7 out of 10 for both seasons. Oban Star Racers. This is a show about a girl who ends up being a racer in an intergalactic competition while trying to sort out some of her own personal issues. I was a bit surprised to see this one actually listed on my anime list because it's at least partially a French production. I had caught a tiny glimpse of this show on TV as a kid, and only some years back I found it again and decided to watch it in full. And what do you know? Despite being targeted towards a younger audience, it's actually a real nice adventure show, and it's not just nostalgia speaking. There would just be one thing that would keep infuriating me. The whole story could have been so much more simple if the main character just had the guts to actually talk to her dad. 7 plus out of 10. Paprika. I know that this is supposed to be good, and I did watch it, but I have zero memories of this film somehow, aside from a few select scenes. I guess 7 plus out of 10? Paranoia Agent. Same folks as Paprika. I guess fairly similar style. There are cool ideas, but again, there wasn't that much that really stood out to me. The whole thing is pretty psychedelic and stuff. 7 out of 10. Magical Girl Madoka Magica. Madoka Magica is supposed to be a darker subversion of the magical girl trope, And I know some people who are hardcore into this stuff, but I don't know, it just didn't do it for me. It has that cutesy art style that I don't like. I've seen things that tackle dark topics better. Maybe if I was into the magical girl trope, this darker spin on it would hit harder, but it just didn't really work on me. 6 out of 10. Ere 0. Starting life in another world. This one seems to be quite popular, but it's yet another fantasy isekai where a loser MC gets surrounded by a bunch of sexy girls. It does at least have a pretty nice darker spin on it, reminiscent of When They Cry, which makes it pretty intriguing to watch. First season, 7 out of 10. Memory Snow? That's a feel-good bonus film, which I can appreciate being a separate thing instead of filler episodes. 6 out of 10. The Frozen Bond, a prequel film that's worth watching before the second season, but I found myself a bit less invested in it since it's somewhat detached from the main story. 6 out of 10. Season 2, both parts 1 and 2, gets a 7 out of 10. It just continues the same quality of Season 1. Season 3 only gets a 5 out of 10 from me. It feels like it lost a bit of its identity, in turn feeling more like another generic story. On top of that, it felt like it gave a lot of focus to side characters, who I just didn't care about at all, and the villains were just straight up annoying. Rurouni Kenshin. One of the first animes, if not the first one I've ever seen. It's pretty rare for animes to appear on TV here. It used to be called Samurai X here. It follows the story of a legendary swordsman who decided to leave his murderous past behind and become a pacifist. Yet he's forced to continue fighting to protect people from various villains. Rurouni Kenshin does fall victim to a lot of anime tropes, and it does have episodes that feel like filler, but it still manages to be a pretty nice adventure. Also, the intro themes are pretty great, especially the second one. 7 plus out of 10. Rurouni Kenshin, Trust and Betrayal. A 4-episode prequel to Rurouni Kenshin. It's a story about how Kenshin became the way he is, and it's a lot more dark, serious, and even sad. 8 out of 10. Rurouni Kenshin 2023. A very faithful remake of the original series. The first season can be watched pretty interchangeably based on whether you prefer older or more modern anime style. 7 out of 10. Rurouni Kenshin Kyoto Disturbance. A continuation of the remake. I was quite excited to witness the Kyoto arc again, but the story arc wasn't finished in this season, which I hoped would happen, and the third season has been announced. Apparently there is more story to Rurouni Kenshin than the original anime adapted, so the remake might have the benefit of just continuing the story further, but so far it felt like this specific season had less significant events in it. I also started liking the modern style in it less and less, and missing the old soundtrack, which was actually quite memorable. 6 out of 10. Sacrificial Princess and the King of Beasts. This is pretty much a spin on Beauty and the Beast. The human and the furry kingdoms are opposed to each other. The main girl was sent as a sacrifice to the furry king, but instead they fell in love with each other, and the rest was a very sweet love story in which the pair tried to establish more tolerance both between the furry species as well as furries and humans overall. It's not the deepest thing ever, but it's a pretty cozy watch. 7 out of 10. Saint Young Men. After Arakawa Under the Bridge, I wanted to chase that high with something similar and decided to look into other works by the same author. Saint Young Men was one of them. The premise is that Jesus and Buddha are sharing an apartment in Japan. It sounds like it could be a good premise for some pretty great comedy, but I didn't find most of the jokes all that funny. Maybe with the exception of Jesus being mistaken for a member of Yakuza. The whole film was composed of random slice of life moments and lacked any proper plot. It ended up just boring me. 4 out of 10. Sakamoto Days. This is a comedy show about a retired assassin who found love and decided to lead a peaceful life, yet people from his past would still try to assassinate him for knowing too much and being too dangerous. I guess it's a decent show if you're looking for something light, but I ended up dropping it because of its episodic nature and lack of a continuous plot. 6 out of 10. Serial Experiment Lane. Ah, the cult classic. An awkward girl discovers the internet and ends up getting into conspiracies, God in the cables, and all that good stuff. The whole time I was watching this show, I kept pointing my finger at the screen like DiCaprio, thinking how I've seen a lot of the same ideas in The Silver Case. It's a pretty cool and suspenseful, almost psychedelic vibe. I didn't think it was a masterpiece like a lot seem to do, but it does have its merits. 7 plus out of 10. Spice and Wolf. Merchant meets the Wise Wolf. This is the series that made me realize that, hey, I actually like romance series. And that's quite a big feat getting me all soft like that. Most other romance-focused animes on this list are likely here because of this one. Spice and Wolf is a story about a merchant who ends up traveling together with a pagan deity of harvest and starts falling in love with her during the journey. I found the themes of paganism, myths, and their relation to a monotheistic religion very interesting. The character dynamics were great, and the whole plot is very believable and intriguing, despite not having much action. I guess the older version of this anime already had a strong following, and while I hadn't watched it myself, I think this remake is doing the story justice. And I hear that the original version hadn't finished the story, so this remake might even become the superior version when it comes to completion. I am very much eager to see what comes next from the show. 8 out of 10. Steins Gate. I kept seeing recommendations to this show, as well as the fact that it's number 3 ranked anime on my anime list, so I tried watching it and I was actually pretty let down. I don't understand these super high ratings. It's a story about a couple of nerds who invent a time machine and the chaos it brings. There's already been time traveling shows on this list I enjoyed more. I just found the cast in this show pretty unlikable and lacking depth. The show wasn't straight up bad, but I didn't see anything that great either, and it didn't inspire me much confidence that these sequels would be any better. 7 minus out of 10. Steins Gate Egoistic Poreomania. This is a bonus episode for the first season of Steins Gate. I guess it's an alright filler if you do like the characters, but I just didn't care much for it. 6 out of 10. Summertime Rendering. A guy returns to his home island from his studies in Tokyo to attend the funeral of his childhood friend and finds out that there's some nasty supernatural stuff going on. It's a fun little story, but it wasn't crazy impressive and had what I'd say is some unnecessary fanservice. I don't know if it can ever be necessary. It did have some things that I thought could make for some cool party-based video game mechanics. 7 out of 10. The Rising of the Shield Hero. This series might have some vague similarities to Spice and Wolf, but ultimately it's still a generic fantasy isekai. Normally I would say that's not great, but I did like the main cast and how it tackles some trickier themes like societal prejudice and injustice. I watched it back to back with Re:Zero, and while I think that had a better plot, Shield Hero has the more likable characters. 7 out of 10 for the first season. I felt like the second season focused a bit too much on action, making it feel like even more typical anime, making it lose its unique flair a bit. 6 out of 10. The third season recovers somewhat. 7 out of 10. Uzumaki. Spiral into Horror. Oh boy. I was actually quite excited about this one and felt like it had some serious potential. It started its run great, but then immediately face-planted into the mud. I loved the idea of the black and white art style mimicking the manga. I feel like that might be the only way to accurately represent Berserk, but that will probably never happen. The soundtrack was quite cool, memorable, and fitting for the unique, surreal vibe. The first episode of this show was quite stunning, but then the show suffered from a severe drop in production quality, making the previously cool-looking art and animation look incredibly janky. I struggled to comprehend how they couldn't maintain the production quality for just 4 episodes. I guess it could have been even worse, but it's not great. 6 out of 10. Vinland Saga. This is one of the main shows that made me think that there are some good animes after all, and it might be worth watching them after my hater phase. Vinland Saga is a story based on actual historical events, the Viking raids to England and all that stuff. I can't stress it enough, but it's honestly better than a lot of live-action historical films and series. It does have pretty good historical accuracy, and it isn't a surface-level story focused just on battles, but also delves into deeper, more introspective topics. It's a very well-paced show, with no nonsense, and I could easily recommend it to people who don't even watch anime. The only thing that's keeping it from being a 10 out of 10 for me are the fights. They're not bad, but they do follow some over-the-top anime conventions, making it a bit unbelievable, especially when everything else is so realistic and down-to-earth. 9 out of 10. The second season of the show is a lot slower, has a lot less action, and I can see some ordinary viewers be put off by that, but I absolutely love the more thoughtful nature of the season and the character development it portrayed. 9+ out of 10. Welcome to the NHK. I didn't really expect to like this one, as it's mostly a commentary about otakus, but it was a surprisingly touching show. It's about the day-to-day life of a shut-in nerd with a terrible social anxiety disorder, no job and no friends, and his attempts to better himself and become a functioning human being. And there's a lot of silly stuff like him getting addicted to MMOs or oogling at anime booba, but it also isn't afraid to delve into more serious topics, trauma, psychological issues, and that's what really elevated the show into something pretty interesting from just another slice of life show with some romantic elements. 7+ out of 10. Wizardry. I liked Wizardry 8. I knew the game series had a lot of influence in Japan, so when I saw there was an old anime film based on those games, I got quite curious to watch it. It's alright. It's as deep as a puddle. It basically has the same premise as most Wizard games. A party of various race and class adventurers team up to delve ever deeper into a dungeon for riches and glory. I would say it's a completely ordinary anime, but I guess the nods at the games were fun. It's not something I would highly recommend, but I enjoyed it enough for something pretty brainless. 6 out of 10. Wolf's Rain. It's nice that I can finish this on a high note. When I had first decided that I liked anime in my early teens, I went to look for pretty much anything I could watch, and Wolf's Rain just so happened to be the first thing I stumbled upon, in a format where every episode was split into 3 parts on YouTube no less, before the time videos could be over 10 minutes long, and I absolutely loved it. It's a story about a dying world and a group of mythical wolves who hide their existence from humanity, searching for a fabled paradise, which might not even exist. It's one of the most atmospheric shows I've seen. The art style has the peak old school anime quality. The designs are great. I love the desaturated colors. The soundtrack is one of my favorites in any show, and it's overall just a very well constructed story with a great presentation. The main cast was quite good, but I absolutely loved the character development of the side characters. Everyone in the show felt like a nuanced human, or a wolf, being. I would think it's just my nostalgia speaking, but I had rewatched the show several times throughout my life, and I can confidently say that it holds up. 10 out of 10. And that's all I watch for now. It seems I have publicly outed myself as a weeb now, and I hate that. I guess I did it to myself. Going through all the shows and films was still quite fun, as it reminded me of my whole life progression, how I saw my first glimpses of anime on TV as a child, how I got to like it in my early teens, how I started hating it after realizing how goddamn formulaic most of the stuff is, and then giving it another chance after seeing some select great shows. I feel like at this point in time I have already seen the shows I deem my favorites, and what's left is a notion of slop with some hidden gems every now and then. At the same time, I found a relaxing, if somewhat addictive activity just to unwind after work, turn off my brain, and binge some show. Whether it's some intriguing action or mystery flick, or just a comfy feel-good tale. And yeah, I have no clue how this video will do, as it's very different from what I usually do. If you made it this far, thank you. Do let me know what you thought of this kind of video in the comments. Maybe there are some shows I'm oblivious about that I absolutely should watch based on the ones I liked. Did you agree or disagree with my takes? I want to remind you that all of these ratings are still just my subjective opinion, and if you'd like to talk about these shows more in depth, feel free to drop by my Discord server, the link is in the description. I'm not even sure when I could make another video like this if it does well. It would take me quite some time to watch another 100 animes. I doubt I can watch more than 4 in a month even if I seriously dedicate myself to it. I also realized after making this list that my ratings are higher than I expected myself. It might be a lot more accurate to my overall views on anime to include all the series that I dropped because I just dislike them that much. Maybe in the sequel I might be a lot meaner. There also might have been a couple of things that I could have forgotten, or there are some shows that are just not listed on my anime list for being released by Western studios, which I think fit in with anime just fine, like The Last Airbender, The Legend of Korra, Castlevania and so on. But yeah, that's my ranking so far. Hope you found it entertaining, or maybe even informative. It's pretty nice for myself to do something different and a bit more simple to mix things up. Thank you again for watching, and I'll see you in another video.